we had a couple more minutes. I always ask us, how was parking? Was it crazy or is it normal?
No, it was okay.
Okay. Sometimes what'll happen is that, so I get here first thing in the morning, and then they'll have some event, and then like students will be like all like frantic and like trying to get to their seats. Something will happen. They're like, there's like 1,000 cars outside, and there's they're doing 3 different county science fairs or something. Like some very large event. So I try to be mindful of students at least getting here on time. But we'll wait a couple more minutes just in case. Is there anybody here that it's your first week like you missed last week? I know there's at least one person that I got a request from. Okay. So while we're waiting, because we were having weird projector issues last week and we really didn't get much done, I need you to do attendance. It's really straightforward. You only have to do attendance once. This is just for like the federal reporting mandates and all that stuff. I did this semester. I had to put in like a little blurb because I was getting a lot of students cheating and then kind of like saying, "Oh, I didn't know you couldn't do that." So this is just basically this is basically the school's policy anyway. This is not anything crazy, but it's assignments and projects. You can get help from like, let me think how to say this. The bulk of the assignment has to be done by you. So you can get help from your friends in class and stuff like that, and even if there's various lab tutors and stuff on campus. But what I don't want is somebody sitting over your shoulder and doing yeah, exactly, character by character, what to add. And the other thing is that I'm disallowing those homework help sites. Has anybody seen those? There's a lot of cheating that goes on those, where people will literally copy and paste their entire assignment and then say, I didn't know you can use those. So, yeah, so you can't pay somebody money or even just, get the answer for free. But that's basically what it is. And then the exams, again, you have to do those by yourself. So some of this stuff may seem obvious to most people in here, but ever since I've gotten here, it's usually like 1 or 2 students per semester I catch cheating. And I guess if you've already been caught cheating, might as well lie at that point. But that's all this is. It's due by midnight, so if you want to go through with a fine-tooth comb and read it, but I tried to make it pretty straightforward. Any questions on this?
Cool.
Does anybody have any philosophical disagreements with the cheating policy? Seems very straightforward to me. Okay. And then the first assignment's posted. But this should be very straightforward. This is HTML only. This one doesn't even use CSS. Normally I'll give you 2 weeks, but because this is like a review assignment, this should be, I noticed a few, I recognized a few faces in here. How many people had me for CGS1821?
Nope.
So if you had me for CGS1821, this should look familiar. This is basically like the first, like 4 or 5 assignments all squished down into one assignment. So this is basically, long story short, this is like CGS 1821 level material. This should take you not that long. How many people watched the review lecture posted online? After having watched that, this should be a breeze. It's basically all those examples that I gave in the review lecture. It's those examples, I just kind of tweak it a little bit. You'll notice that about my assignments is that I tried to not give you anything crazy. It's just basically, if like you understand the basic material, it's usually like I do like some little tweaks here and there for the assignment. But this class is a little bit different because you can be a little bit more creative. A lot of the programming classes are very rigid. It's like the program, I really want you to write it a specific way. But I've seen people get pretty, yeah. I've kind of let everyone in this class, especially since you're seniors, you're a little bit more mature at this point in your school career. I'm usually pretty forgiving about giving you like a wide area to work within. So I've seen people come up with some really creative stuff. As long as you're working within the framework of the assignment, like if the assignment is about Flexbox, as long as you incorporated Flexbox in some sort of meaningful way, like the assignment had, I'm usually pretty open. So
are you still opposed? Can we still add color and things
Yeah, I'm not.
I just don't like.
Yeah, I understand because a lot of you haven't had like only a few hands went up. A lot of you haven't had me before. So things like color and if you want to add new content, things like that. As long as you can look at yourself and say, did I fulfill the core basic requirements? So like part 4 of this assignment. Can everyone see that? Do make the fonts a little bit larger here? By the way, I would just shout at any time that I need to make fonts larger. I know it's kind of tough for people in the back. But part 4, you basically just have to create an index page and then link to a couple of products. And the core of the assignment is, do you understand how relative paths work? So as long as you had the folder structure set up correctly and then you had a couple of pages, I'd be okay with that. Like some people in the past, rather than just writing product 1, product 2, and then lorem ipsum text, they might do something where they actually create full color pages and add some images of like various products, you know, things like that. So you're welcome to do that. On these initial assignments, because you're just using HTML, it's kind of gets a little bit tough to get creative with just HTML and no CSS or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, it is.
But by the time we get to like assignment number 3, we're going to start to talk about layouts and some more involved stuff.
Style tag.
What's that?
Right, the style tag.
Where is it?
No, I mean, you can use a style tag instead of in that piece, not CSS, but it's not technically CSS.
It's CSS. It's just a different way to include it.
Oh.
We're actually going to go over that today, so it's good you brought it up. Did anybody have any questions on HTML review? For most people, this is your 3rd semester on this stuff, so. And everyone did, when you did your classes, everyone actually did HTML coding, right? Nobody just did like key terms and definitions. Thumbs up or show of hands if you have to actually write some code in your other classes. Everybody? Okay, perfect. Okay, let's just go ahead and get started. So that's out there. That's due in a week, but I make these due at 11:59. So if like you get the bulk of it done, but next week there's just like a couple of things that you don't quite understand. It's due at 11:59, so you could ask me in class and still have a little bit of time to work on it for the rest of the day. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Unfortunately, the hybrid format makes it very like difficult to answer too many questions and stuff, so we kind of have to get right into it. Okay. Open up your CGS4828 folder, make a new folder. So today is the 27th, so 8-27. And then open up brackets. So while you're doing that, and then set the working folder to that folder that you just created. I'm going to open up some links here. Okay, and then make sure you're signed into Blackboard. One quick thing, I think I mentioned this last class, but you're sort of assumed, like, you don't really have to write down and take notes and stuff. It's not that sort of class. You're welcome to if you want, but what I want you to do is everyone in here to actually follow along and code along, okay? I know in some other classes it's like very like conceptual and you'll kind of write down what the professor's saying. In this class it's more like a tutorial style where I write some code. You get the practice of actually writing the code.
And they're kind of like examples?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
That's good.
You're welcome to take notes if you want, but kind of make that your secondary priority to actually writing the code. Okay, so if you go to Blackboard here, we're going to cheat. I'm always going to let you use this HTML shell, this boilerplate code, because we will save a lot of time.
Yep.
And then, so mine's set to this weird folder, getting started. What I want to do is click that, open folder, and then set it to today's folder. So I'll do that one more time, I know, because it's, let's see if I can zoom in. Perfect. Okay, so inside of brackets, you'll have, yours probably says something else, but mine's pointed to a folder called Getting Started. Click Open Folder. And then, in my case, I put it on my desktop. But you might point it to a flash drive. It doesn't really matter what. CGS4828, and then today's date. Select the folder. Now, anytime, the reason I have you do this is because now anytime you create a file, it's automatically put in the correct spot. Previous semesters, I had students where they would have a Singles Day lecture spread across their desktop, their documents, and a flash drive. And at the end of class, they didn't know where anything was, and they would turn in an assignment. But this is nice because this sort of forces you to put everything in one spot by default. Okay, so we're going to go to File, New. And then so I'm on htmlshell.com. I'm going to copy and paste this code in. And we don't have any syntax highlighting yet. What do I have to do for syntax highlighting? What haven't we done yet? What's that? Well, close. Yeah, we have to actually save it so it knows it's an HTML file. So I use shortcuts a lot, but just so you know what I'm doing, sometimes I'll just go through the motions. Okay, file save. And then you can see here I put it in the correct spot. So I'm going to call it ex1, and then don't forget the .html. It's important. And then you can use this little live preview thing to see your site. And then we're going to go to w3schools.com. There's links to these in Blackboard, but some of you might just be able to, just very quickly Google for W3 Schools. And then we want to go to the CSS section. So we're going to dive right into CSS. Again, today's class is going to be another review. I just want to make sure everyone's very strong in this stuff, because I know a lot of times you go through these classes the first time through, and you're like, I got through the assignments. Do I really understand it? Maybe not 110%. Maybe I have like an 80% understanding, 90% understanding. But that's why I want to do reviews, to make sure that you're really solid on these topics. And then we're going to go to Learn CSS. And what else do we have open? Oh, we're going to use lorem ipsum text a lot. Do I have a link in here? Yeah. You can just Google it. Lorem ipsum. Everyone knows what this is, right? It's just dummy text, dummy Latin text.
Lorem ipsum. I have like all the facts.
There's a actually a brackets plugin, I think, or something like that, where you can actually type in lorem ipsum and hit like tab or something, and it gives you a paragraph. So maybe I'll look at that later. But for now, we'll do it the old school way here, and we'll paste some stuff in. So let's start off with a paragraph of lorem ipsum. What I'll do sometimes is I'll just kind of chop this down a little bit just for readability purposes. Code becomes a little bit easier to read. Okay, so this should be your starting point for right now, is that we've got a paragraph of lorem ipsum text. And sometimes I'll bounce around a little bit on this site, and sometimes I have to find my spot. It's here. Okay. So under CSS how-to, so there's 3 different ways to insert CSS. We have external style sheets. I think most people in here had to do a lot of work with external style sheets, right? In the real world, you tend to use them. In this class, I'm not going to use them as often because it just takes up time to create a whole nother separate file. So what I'm going to often do is use internal CSS. It's also nice because when I'm giving examples, if I can have all the code on one screen, it makes things a lot more readable. That's not to take anything away from external CSS. That actually tends to be the more common way to include it in your site. But for examples, it makes them a million times easier, maybe not a million, maybe just 100,000 times easier to read when you've got them internal. Internal is where you use the style tag, and then that's where you put your CSS. And then inline. So let's start off with inline CSS. And so to use inline CSS, what you do is within the actual tag, you do style equals, and let's say color. Now, one of the nice things about brackets is that it kind of gives you human readable names of a lot of common colors. So then rather than having to use like hexadecimal codes or RGB numbers and so on, we could just keep life simple. So I'm going to use cadet blue. Maybe that wasn't the best because it's not really showing up. Let me use some red light color. Dark goldenrod. There we go. And I try to make all the fonts larger so you can see, but you don't have to for your own purposes. Okay. So you can see here that we've got our CSS property called color, and its value is dark goldenrod. Okay, so this is our CSS property, and this is its value. Okay, so if I did something like this, that's not new to anybody, right? You've seen this before? This is all just review? Okay. So without actually running this second paragraph, what color is the text going to be? Is it going to be dark goldenrod, yes or no? No. Why?
It's another section.
Yeah, so when you have inline, how long is inline effective for? From what point to what point? So only the length of that tag.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you this. Does everyone remember the strong tag? Is this word going to be dark goldenrod? It's definitely going to be strong. I'll give you that hint. But is it going to be dark goldenrod?
No.
So argue for no.
I'm going to go for yes.
Yeah, so why do you think yes?
Because I thought that covers the whole paragraph.
Exactly, yeah. So when we put stuff within it, that is going to be covered by it. So its effective length is from the start of the tag to the close of the tag. So if you happen to put in strong, you can see that right here. Okay. And I don't remember if I brought this up last week, but there's basically two types of tags. There are block level and inline. So is paragraph block level or inline? And then is strong block or inline? Inline, perfect, okay. So that was inline. That's pretty straightforward. I don't want to, some of these examples I'll just try to keep short. So let's do another example. Everyone has that? If not, what I actually usually do is post the HTML at the end of class. I didn't do it last class because the examples were kind of trivial, but as the examples get a little bit more complex, I'll start doing that. And there's always the video. I'm recording this for anybody who didn't notice. It's barely dropping any frames, so we're in good shape. Okay, so start a new file. Start off with HTML shell. I know I'm going through this a little quick. I'm sort of assuming that, I mean, you're seniors, so it's not like your first time at a keyboard here. So we've got example2.html. I pasted it in HTML shell. And we've just got a boilerplate thing here. So there are 3 ways to insert CSS. I'm assuming you know how to do external, but we're not going to really use it in this class because it's just going to take up time. I just showed you an example of inline. And now let's use internal. So now to use internal, we have to use what's known as the CSS selector. There's a bunch of different types of selectors, but we're just going to stick with the, bless you, element, ID, and class. So just in plain English, you don't have to use overly technical terms. Actually, let's do this. Let me walk you through it. Okay, so sometimes this, oh no, I don't know if I have it installed. Hold on. Extension Manager. No, I do have it. That's weird. Okay. There we go. Okay. Okay. So if we wanted to do an internal style sheet, what we have to do is we have to put the style tag in the head section. So usually it works pretty decent for indenting, but for whatever reason here it's not doing a great job. Whatever. And so there are three types of selectors that we're going to work with. So let's start off with the element selector. And then let's do a couple short paragraphs of lorem ipsum. So inside of the head section, I put in the style tag. This is known as an internal style sheet. So the other thing was inline styles. This is internal. Make sure you know that terminology. Not like I would ask on a test. It's like if I'm explaining something during class and I say, okay, make an internal style sheet. I want to make sure that.
So that's an internal style sheet?
Correct. Yeah. This is called internal. And you can always check back with W3 Schools under How To. And then they have a little thing on internal CSS. You can see here the style tag. So without actually running it, some of you might have already run it, but that's okay. First paragraph is, does this show up? Okay. What color is this going to be?
Orchid, yeah.
Second paragraph. Yeah, so that's correct. Second paragraph, what color is it going to be?
Orchid.
Orchid, right? Because the way these work is that these are element selectors. And so what happens is that everything with the paragraph tag, the P tag, is going to be, this is going to apply to it. Okay? Pretty straightforward. So if I did something else here, like let's say an H1, so my title, is my title going to be Orchid?
No.
No, right?
It's gonna
Because
be a different paragraph.
exactly, because it's a different tag. And just to confirm, everyone's good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to keep these examples kind of short because it makes it, I know we have to, there's like some overhead of creating a new page each time, but I think it makes them a little bit more readable. Okay, so go ahead and another HTML shell. You'll get very quick at this process. Paste it in. Save this one as ex3.html. We're going to do another internal style sheet. And I always make this mistake. I think it's just how brackets lines it up. Make sure to put it within the head section. So if you click here, you see the syntax highlighting shows you where head starts and ends. So we dealt with the element selector. Let's skip ID for now. Let's go to class. Okay. When looking at a rule, a selector rule for a class, how do you know it's a class versus an element selector? What specific character gives it away?
Period.
The period, yeah, the dot. So you can see here there's a class name called dot center. And that basically gives it away that it's a class selector. Okay. So let's do this. Let's create a class called announcement. And maybe we want the announcement to, it doesn't really matter too much, but. By the way, one of the nice features of brackets is that as you start typing, because there's like a million of these CSS properties, if you can kind of halfway remember the property, so you're like, I know it's something related to font, and then you can kind of browse through. So this is the nice thing of using this versus like a plain old Notepad, or even like Notepad++ versus like brackets is. What's that?
It does it for me, like John Display, Font Family, everything does that.
Which one are you using?
Notepad++.
Oh, it did? Huh.
It
Let me
does.
see now. Okay. But plain old Notepad doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
What are they doing? Oh yeah, font style. Okay. And now to actually use it, let's use it with an H1. Now one of the things that people get thrown off is so up here I'm defining my announcement class, and I'm saying, okay, it's going to use the color property, and I'm setting its value to red, and then the font style property, I'm setting that to underline. I think it actually, as you're typing, I think it even gives you the possible values. Yeah, so you can see here under font style, I have italic, normal, oblique. Italic. What did I do before? Did I do underline? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not thinking. Yeah, so we're going to set the font style to italic. I was thinking of text decoration. So the color is going to be red. The font style is going to be italic. So up here we define it with the dot. So I don't write class equals dot announcement, correct?
No.
I just write class equals announcement.
Yeah. Because the top, the dot means.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's.
Then announcement is just it's an ID. Like kind of like an ID.
Yeah, like here we're actually saying it's a class. And actually, even if we actually put the dot, it would get confused and it wouldn't apply. So this is just something I see come up a lot. So that's why a lot of times I bring these things up. It's because I've seen students do it before. And then, sorry, first announcement as the text. By the way, don't worry about this like little blue stuff here. This the brackets web server has like a built-in editor. As you click things, it can do other things. But if you just kind of click somewhere else, you can see here that the color is red and it's italicized. It's only very large because I made my fonts large. On yours, it's going to be smaller. I don't know if you've talked about this much. I don't know if there's a specific name for it, but in W3 schools, they called their class center. We called our class announcement. Why do you think center is a bad name for a class name versus announcement? And I'm making the claim that announcement is a better name for something like that.
It doesn't center.
So what you should do generally is that you should not name your class names how it looks or where it's located, because that could change and then you've got a stupid class name. So for example, on my site, I might have TopNav. I might create a class called Top Navigation or TopNav. Well, the class name becomes very confusing if all of a sudden I change up my site and that Top Navigation is now on the side, but it's called TopNav. Or I've got I've got a class name called Center, and then I decided I no longer want to center it. Maybe I want to justify it, but I've got a class name called Center. Announcement, I'm saying what it is. I'm saying that this is an announcement. So I can change I can change the color and the font style and all that sort of stuff. But as long as it's an announcement, that class name still applies. Does that make sense? So we generally want to say what it does, not how it looks or where it's located. Okay, so without running it, is second announcement, is the color going to be red?
I think so.
No.
Why or why not? Who says yes? Who says no? So somebody who, exactly, yeah. So had we changed this to an element selector where it applies to all elements, that would be the case. But because we're using classes, it's only applying to any class anytime we've used this class, essentially. So if I do set it to an announcement, let me actually just show you to confirm that is the case. So you can see here that the first announcement is red, but second announcement is not. But as soon as we set class equals announcement, okay. Now there's the cascading part of cascading style sheets. So say, for example, this is a class, and I want to create a class called due date, or yeah, that's good, I guess. And so I'm just adding random stuff here. Just so you get some practice. Like I said, there's a lot of these properties. Color, green. Yeah, I'll add the class in a second. Our assignment isn't due this Friday. This is just a hypothetical course. So now if I set it to the class, okay, so I say equals due date. I'm not moving too fast for anybody, am I? I have a set number of examples I want to get through, but it's kind of pointless if nobody can keep up. Everyone's good? Okay. So I've created a class called DueDate, gave it a couple of properties. Text decoration underline, color is green. So I'm setting it to the class DueDate. And it's underlined in green. Well, the due date might also be an announcement. So what we can do is we can actually apply multiple classes. This becomes important once we get into later. We're going to use a few CSS frameworks like Bootstrap and so on, where they'll actually have you apply multiple classes.
Oh my god.
And so we have to kind of walk through this. Oops. There we go. Okay. So what happens is that, first of all, we just space separate these. So I said class equals announcement space due date. And what it's going to do is it's going to apply announcement. So it's going to apply that it's red and italicized. But notice that it's not red. What happens is then due date shows up, and due date says, okay, well, I'm going to say that the text decoration is underlined and green. Anytime we override it, so in this case, we had announcement, which set the color to red, but then due date set the color to green. So it kind of processed these in order, so the final color was green. But notice that the technical term is inherit, so it inherited everything from announcement, but then it only overrode the things it needed to. So it's still italicized and underlined. So What it got from announcement was that the color was red and it was italicized. And then here it said also add that it's underlined and the color is green. It's still going to keep the italicized text. It's going to keep that style. But because we've also specified color, the color is going to go from red to green. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So it's just overriding the things it needs to, but it inherits everything else. We'll take a second just to breathe because I know I'm going through this kind of fast. Any questions on this? Any part not make sense? Okay, I try to say things a bunch of times, that way if you miss it the first time. So let's go over some terminology again. This thing is a class selector. This specific class name is announcement. In the previous example, we used element selectors. And how do we know it's an element selector? Just has some tag name, right? There's no dot in front of it or hash symbol or anything like that. These things are called CSS properties. For longer property names, what they'll typically do is just put a dash in between, but font style is one single property name. The reason they do this is because sometimes they group them together, like you'll have a bunch of font-related things with font dash something. So, but this is all one property. When you define these, I guess I didn't say this before, but we separate with a colon. So we say that the color colon is going to be red. That's the value. And then we separate these rules with a semicolon. And then we wrap the entire thing with a curly brace. So this is only effective from here to here. We can mix and match these a million different ways, but I don't want to be overly confusing. To me, just showing some basic cascading techniques is enough for now. Any questions on that? No one feels confused at all? This is pretty much review, right? Like you did this. How many people took the Professor Gibson's course in the spring? So it's pretty fresh in your memory.
It was so boring, and I passed a high B.
Okay.
Lovely.
Okay, so let's do a new example here. So ex4.html. So let's quickly talk about the box model, because the box model is kind of important, kind of is worth its own example. So anytime you have a block level element, this doesn't really apply to inline. It might in some form, but really when we talk about the box model, we're typically talking about block elements. There are, so there's the actual content. So if I'm writing some paragraph of text, it's the actual characters of the text. Then I've got this thing called a border. You may or may not actually see the border.
Box model.
You'll get used to it. It's not that tough.
Box model just.
So anytime you have, let's say, a paragraph of text, let's grab a lorem ipsum paragraph here.
Yeah, I use that.
And I'm going to be lazy, and I'm just going to do it with a div here. Div is kind of like your catch-all.
I love div tags.
Yeah. In practice, you're supposed to use what's most appropriate, but if you go to most web pages, div is used like everywhere.
It's like you can't go like scroll down like half of the story code and then you see a div.
Yeah. Okay, so with this div, and I'm actually going to not use their built-in editor for a second. I'm just going to go to, you don't have to do this. We're already on number 4. So in Chrome, they have something called developer tools. And one of the cool features of this is that it actually, I don't know how to zoom in onto this. I don't think it's going to make the, oh, did it make it larger? Okay. So we've got a div of text here. And this actually shows you the box model. This is pretty cool. So the blue here, this is our actual content. And notice as I hover over it, it's going to highlight. And then we've got our padding. So the padding is the area between the inside of the content and the border. The border is basically like the actual border of the div. So the padding is from the inside of the border to the content. The border itself, in this case, it's just the 0 pixel border. We don't actually see it, but we can make these larger. We will in a second. And then the margin is from the outside of the border till either the edge of the page, or if it's in like a parent container or there's a container next to it or something like that. But it's basically the stuff outside of the border. Okay, and you can go through this in W3 Schools and read it in more detail. But I think you covered the box model in Professor Gibson's course, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this isn't
It's
anything
not.
new. So let's
It was the.
you'll get used to it. It's just
It's the bane of me.
like anything else, it just needs practice. Okay, so let's do a let's go ahead and in the head section, let's go ahead and put a style tag here. Oops. I'm going to be a little bit lazy on this example. Use the element selector. Or let's do this. Let's do ID.
Ooh, box model?
Perfect. And then how can you tell the difference between a class and an ID?
One has a period and one has a hashtag.
Perfect, exactly. And then rather than class equals, we do ID equals. ID is actually supposed to be unique. So if we created this ID called box model, we're only supposed to use it once in the page. In practice, I think the code will still work. Usually what happens actually is that the reason you'd use ID is because you want the content to be unique for purposes of a programming language. When you did your JavaScript, we're not going to do JavaScript in here, so don't have panic attack.
I hated it.
But
So
do
much.
you remember a function called getElementById?
Yes.
So that doesn't work if when you get element by ID, you want to do something like, okay, I want to set this element to like the color of it to be red or something like that or whatever. That doesn't really work that well if you go to retrieve the element and it returns like 10 elements. So the whole purpose is that you're guaranteed just to return one element.
I hated JavaScript so much when I had to do it.
Don't worry, you won't have to do any this time. Okay. So what we're going to do is let's just let's give it a background color here. Something we can actually see. Aqua, I guess. And just for testing purposes, let's give it a fixed width because it becomes a little bit easier to analyze if it's a fixed width. And let's just give it some border patterning and margin just so we can actually see the thing. 20 pixels is a pretty big border. Let's go 5 pixels. Oh, let me make sure I'm saved here. Oh, well, okay, whatever. Notice over here that in our box model, our content, as I highlight it, it's saying that it's 300 pixels wide, which we already knew. The padding here, that's the green. Notice their little color keys here. So as I hover over that, that's green. That's the area between the content and the border. Oh, we didn't give the solid. And then, what color haven't we used yet? Red. Sorry, I made a mistake here. So we also, not only do we have to give it a width, we have to say, so it could be like solid, dotted, whatever. Here we're saying it's solid, and we have to give it a color. So here, we can see here that it's, I know this is a little bit tough to see, but can everyone see that it says 5? So that 5 that we defined earlier, that's the 5 pixel border width. And as we hover over it, probably can't see it that well because the color, the yellow and the red kind of clash. And then the margin, notice that on the left, top, and bottom, the margin is 20 pixels. So that's basically around. But what do you notice on the right side? The margin's essentially all the way to the edge of the page because it's a block element. So it's going to take up everything for the rest of the line. Does that make sense?
There we go. Yes.
Okay. So that's the basics of the box model. We're going to use it to do more interesting things. But as long as you understand that base thing, that you've got some content in the center, you've got this thing that wraps around the div, paragraph, whatever, header, footer, whatever block element, and then the area between the content and the border, that's called padding, and then the stuff from the border to outside, either other containers at the edge of the page, whatever, that's called margin. Everyone knows at least that much? Okay, so by itself, it's not that interesting, but it becomes more interesting as we do other things with it. So we're going to take a quick detour. Does everyone remember float?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do some stuff with float. So new example. HTML shell. We're already on EX5. And again, don't worry, I'll post all these and you'll have the lecture video as well. So if you feel a little bit lost, you're not quite getting it, the lecture's not that long. It's only about an hour, so you can always rewatch it and install brackets at home, follow along until you really feel like you get it.
It's like review for me.
What's that?
It's like review for me.
That's good. Okay, so inside of, let's just kind of do our setup here. So inside of head, you can put our style. You're going to see this name come up a lot, container. So we're going to create a class called container. And it's just a very generic name. It just means it's holding something. It's holding a div, it's holding an image, it doesn't really matter what. So very, very frequently you'll hear this term container. So we're making a class called container. And let's go ahead and give it a width of 600 pixels, and then give it a border so we can actually see what we're working with. In the real world, you don't give the box, I think it defaults to black. You don't typically give it borders that often, but just so we can kind of see where we are and see what we're working with, I'm going to do borders for now. And I don't know if I gave a link for this. They have this is interesting. I just found out this like a year ago. Has anybody seen the lorem ipsum for images?
No.
I don't think I put a link here. If you just Google for it, if you just do lorem ipsum image, this is the one I've used before. And it's pretty straightforward. So it's pixum.photos.
What does it do?
It gives you just a random stock photo of the
Oh.
of the width and height that you specify. So it's great for placeholder stuff. Versus like in the past, you might have to actually go to stock image site and find something of that width and height. You know. So until you can get your actual real photos in there, so let's just experiment with this. So go to pixum.photos. There's a bunch of these out there, and this, if you find another, they all tend to work basically the same. And so we're gonna use our div container in a little bit, but let's just put our image in here just for now. Everyone remembers the img tag? And yeah, we should give it an alternate, but we'll worry about that later. And so what this is saying is this is going to give a, let's just make it a square image. Let's go 300 by 300. And then now when you load up your page, mine's obviously very large. Let me reset it to the normal height. But there we go. It gave us a 300 by 300 image. We're doing okay on time. I don't want to move too fast. Take a breather for 15, 20 seconds to make sure everyone's caught up. Everyone's good? Okay, so let's grab some lorem ipsum text here. I'm going to make a paragraph of this, and I think I'm going to grab a little bit more than I had before because I want a long paragraph to work with here. And then so within the div, so I've got a div, an image, and a paragraph of text. And if we look at it inside of our browser here, this is what it looks like. So like I said before, our class container is a very generic name. It just means it's going to hold some stuff. In this case, you can see that this div is going to hold an image and a paragraph. So let's go ahead and say class equals container on this div because it's going to give us, it's going to serve as the box for multiple pieces of content. I'm sorry, class equals container. So it doesn't have to just be bare text that we put inside of a div. We can put images, paragraphs, whatever. But the same box model rules still apply. So you can see here, I'm trying to keep as much as possible on the screen. But you see our outline here. Now we have a fixed width. This is our border. And a very common thing to do is to take this text, wrap it around an image. And does anybody remember what we used to make text wrap around an image? What CSS property? I think I heard it. Say it louder. Float, perfect. Okay, so let's do this. Let's add create a new class. And let's say this is, we've got some article. You tend to see this in like newspapers and stuff a lot where they have like a little image and then some text flowing around it. We're just going to say float left. And then let's go ahead and apply that class. Image class equals article image. I'm going to use a slightly smaller image just so we really get the sense of it flowing around the text. So let's go 200 by 200. Or maybe even tighten up this. So instead of 600 pixels, maybe 500 pixels on the width, just so you really get the idea of how this works. But there you go, you get the idea. So now with our image, notice that the text is right up against it. Well, you might not want that. So what CSS property could I use? Yeah, so so we can either do it, we can either add margin, I think we can add margin to the image, but I'm going to go with padding on. In this case, we could either use padding or margin equally well. You guys yelled padding, so what's that?
I would probably do padding in my case.
Yeah, so and let's just do this inline, just so we can be done with this example. So let's say style, padding, I don't know, let's get them out. Start off with 8 pixels. It's not applying, let's try margin. We might have to add it on the image. Let's do it on the image.
Okay.
So margin, let's do a lot so we know where it's actually applying. Yeah, there. So I what I did instead is I added margin on the image, and you can see here it added its margin. Now, if you decided you didn't want it on the left-hand side, there's different ways where you can just say, I just want margin right, margin bottom. Okay, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Let's do one more example. We have about 10 minutes left. Oh, no, that clock's wrong. I was looking at the clock on the Mac.
It's 9:58.
Yeah. Okay.
We end at 10:15.
Yeah. Okay, so we have time for one more example, one more short example. Yeah, the clocks on the Macs are wrong. My phone is saying 9:58. It's throwing me off here. Okay. So let's do one more thing. This one's a little bit more involved, but we should have enough time to get through it comfortably. So let's. So now we're on example 6. And so now using the box model and float, we can actually start to do very, very basic layouts. I know one of the most frustrating things, especially in like CGS1821, is like you learn HTML and CSS and all this stuff, but you never really learn layouts. And so you're like, okay, I want to actually do site layouts. It turns out it's a little bit more complicated than you realize to do layouts, and that's why you kind of have to. I mean, you might be able to do it your freshman year, but just the way the courses are structured, you really don't really get to it till senior year. Okay, so let's go ahead and again we'll do internal style, and let's make another container here. And then we're also going to make a class called card. Card is just like a generic container. It usually has like a title, an image, and some text. It's just kind of like a terminology. I don't know if it's any sort of official terminology, but that's what they use. So a container is going to hold a bunch of things. A card is typically going to have a very specific look. You might have seen it maybe on like social media or something like that, where it's like it has an image, maybe some text on the side, or maybe the text is on the bottom. But that's just what they're called. Okay. So let's make a div here. This is going to be our container. and then we're going to have two cards. One's going to float left. And one is going to float right. So to really get a visual on what we're trying to do here, normally you don't fix a height, you don't set a height because you want your content to, your sites are typically going to be dynamic. So a lot of times the actual text that's filling an element might be from a database, and so you don't want to fix the height, you want it to kind of go as large or small as needed. But we're going to do that just so we see some things. But let's give this container fixed width. So let's say the width is 800 pixels. The cards we're going to make a fixed height. And let's give it a background color just so we can kind of see what we're working with. Say sky blue. Perfect. So I'm going to do a little bit less than the total width because we have two cards. So 400 plus 400, that'd be 800, but then we wouldn't really have any room to work with. So what I'm going to do is a little bit less than that. I'm going to do 380. I'm going to fix the height. So they're going to be almost a box. And then we'll go with green, I guess. So we can really see what we're doing here. Let's actually we'll go ahead and fix the height of the container. Just slightly larger, so 500 pixels. Okay. So we've got our container. We get a fixed width and height and background color just so we can kind of see what we're doing. Same thing with card. We gave it a fixed width and height and then a background color just so we can see where the cards are versus the container. And then we made the width slightly less than the width of its container that's sitting in. And then we made it float left and right. And now let's actually go ahead and apply this class. We're going to say class is equal to card. Same thing here. So they're both a card, and then what we did is we kind of overrode locally. We were saying, okay, one of these cards is going to float left, one of these cards is going to float right. So the basic idea is if you want to kind of put content side by side, this is one technique. We're going to learn better techniques as we go on through Grid and Flexbox, but this is like a just a kind of a basic technique. Now if you wanted to, and this is actually the technique, remember the old IRSC site that was around for years and years and years and years? This is essentially the technique that they used. I think they actually used tables, but
Cool.
if we wanted to center it, so if we didn't want to just kind of hang it on the left hand side of the screen, what could I do? Anybody have any ideas?
I don't remember.
What's that? You might be able to. But what's this area, this little area where my mouse is here, and this area right here called? Is it padding? Is it margin? It's margin, right?
Margin.
So if I found a way to say, okay, space the margin evenly on the left and right hand side, wouldn't that have the effect of kind of pushing it toward the center?
Maybe, yeah.
And we actually have something for that. So what we do is we set the margin to auto. Technically, I think we're supposed to just set the left and right to auto, but I'm lazy. So, and then now, notice that it's centered. So it spaced the margin out evenly on the, technically on all sides, but the effect is that it just was on the left and right hand side because we didn't have any other margin to work with.
Go back to the code.
Yeah. I can make it a little bit smaller maybe so you can see more. Now we sort of cheated. Notice I was kind of apprehensive about putting this height on the container. So I'm going to get rid of the height on container. And what happened? What's missing?
The background.
The background, right? It basically shrunk down to nothing. Floats, it's kind of hard to explain. Floats don't really kind of take up space. They're just kind of floating out there. I don't know a nice technical way to explain it. How many people have heard of the clear fix hack? So once we're done floating, so we floated some content to the left, some content to the right. Once we're done doing that, and we want to clear out all floats, what we do is this clear fix hack. We say style equals clear both. So we're adding a whole separate div, and its only purpose is just to clear out all the existing floats, and we're saying, okay, we're done floating. Now the content is actually going to take up some space. And notice that now it's only taking up the height of these. Let's, so you can see this a little bit better. Let's add some padding to the container. Let's just say padding bottom 30 pixels. Now, granted, there's more modern ways to do this. There's better ways, but this is just kind of like if you want content to be side by side like this, this is a pretty simple, straightforward way to do it. But I'll be honest, even myself, I find myself not using this as much anymore. There are more sophisticated techniques using something called Flexbox and Grid. The problem is it's like this I was able to show you in 10 minutes. Flexbox and Grid is going to take a whole lecture, actually 2 lectures, 1 lecture for each. Probably more than that for me to show you how those systems work. Once you understand how they work, then you can use them to do little effects like this. But just using something simple like float, you say, okay, float 1 to the left, float 1 to the right, clear it out. Boom, you've got content. You've got your first basic layout technique. Okay. For some of you, this might actually have been the first layout technique that you've done, right? I know in CGS1828 I don't teach too many layout techniques.
No. He didn't do much.
Yeah.
Margin, borders,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
So now you see why the box model is actually useful for other things. So by using this box model, we are actually able to create a basic layout. Now I'm being lazy here. I'm just putting some green stuff here. But here you could put a picture and some text and some other cool things in here. Sometimes in this course you'll have to use your imagination because we don't have time to do all that detail stuff. But just think of these green boxes that you're putting pictures of your cats and little captions about stuff they're doing, okay? Okay, so that's it for today. We have a few minutes left, but we'll break a few minutes early. But any questions before we leave?
No.
I'm having an issue over here.
Okay, I'll just help you after class. So just keep in mind there's an assignment out there that's due in 1 week. Normally they're going to be 2 weeks, but for this assignment it's going to be due in 1 week. Don't forget to take care of the assignment because I have to report that in the next couple days. I think that's it. Oh, don't forget that I post the lecture video and the examples as well, so look for that. By the end of the day, I teach a bunch today, so I don't know how
So for the
soon.
attendance, do we just need to click submit? Do we need?
Yeah, that's it. And it's only just this one time.
Okay.
It's just for reporting guidelines that the school has to go through.
Okay.
Yeah, question.
And the assignment number 1, when is that due?
1 week. And just so you know, on the way I set up the assignments, if you click the assignment, it'll always tell you the due date. So you can see here. Okay. No other questions? Everyone's good? Everyone feels comfortable? I'm not moving too fast for anybody? It's all kind of repopulating your brain after a few months? Cool. Correct, yeah. Okay, so if there's no other questions, then I'll help you. If anybody else needs help, I can hang out for about 15 minutes after class and help. But if not, just shoot me an email if you have any problems, and I'll see everybody 1 week from today. Yeah, let me stop stream.